The entire penthouse held its breath. Darian Wexler Knox, a man who thought his billions made him a god, had just humiliated the shy maid Zanira for a spilled drink she didn't pour. He thought she was a victim. He thought she was a nobody. He was wrong. Instead of begging for mercy, Zanira tilted her head and met the gaze of the room's true power. As she did, her sleeve slid back to reveal a crimson geometric tattoo, a mark of the Solène lineage that hasn't been seen in the criminal underworld for a decade. The room went ice-cold. Kang Jisoo Ramir's hand froze halfway to his ceremonial blade. In that moment, he realized this wasn't just a maid. She was a ghost from a bloodline he thought was extinct, and she was the only one who could save his empire. The hallway of the Latte Grand Penthouse, Seoul's most pretentiously guarded residence, smelled of expensive santal, aged whiskey, and pure unadulterated dread. Faster! If the silver isn't gleaming like a mirror when the council arrives, you'll be out on the street by dawn. Mr. Cho, the estate manager, was a man on the verge of a total collapse. He mopped his brow with a trembling hand, his eyes darting between the gold-plated elevator and the clock. It was 8:55 p.m. They had 5 minutes. To the rest of the world, the Latte Grand Penthouse was a palace of glass and steel, but to Zanira, it was a grid of friction and silence. She moved through the corridors not as a person, but as a displacement of air. At 24, she had mastered the maid's glide, a way of walking that suppressed the sound of her heels on Italian marble and ensured she never crossed a guest's line of sight. She spent her mornings erasing the existence of others. She buffed away the fingerprints of billionaires and polished the crystal until it was as transparent as her own presence. To the elite who frequented the penthouse, she was merely part of the furniture, a biological extension of the vacuum cleaner and the lint brush. They discussed offshore accounts and broken alliances over her head as if she were deaf, never realizing that Zanira was a sponge for every whispered secret. Underneath her starch-stiffened collar, her heart beat with the rhythmic precision of a stopwatch. Every day was a rehearsal for a performance she hoped she would never have to give. By 8:50 p.m., the atmosphere in the penthouse shifted from heavy luxury to a sharp, metallic tension. The staff moved with a frantic, jerky energy, but Zanira became even more still. She knew the omens of power. She saw it in the way the security detail swapped their concealed handguns for submachine guns, and in the way Mr. Cho's voice climbed an octave until it sounded like breaking glass. Then, the elevator chimed, a low, melodic note that felt like a funeral bell. The inner council didn't walk. They invaded. First came the background men, a wall of dark-suited shadows with faces carved from granite, fanning out into a militaristic formation that claimed every corner of the room. Then came the silence, a heavy, suffocating weight that followed Kang Jisoo Ramir. As the Ice King entered, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He moved with a disciplined, athletic grace, his black suit tailored so perfectly it looked like armor. Beside him was the seated elder, a man whose silver hair and sharp, heavy brow gave him the appearance of an ancient hawk. They were the apex predators of Seoul, men who dealt in blood and debt. Zanira stood by the buffet, her head bowed at the perfect angle of subservience. Her hands were clasped near her chin, her shoulders pulled inward to make her silhouette appear small and fragile. She looked like a girl who was afraid of her own shadow. But as Darian Wexler Knox followed the council in, his eyes already roaming the room with a predatory, drunken glint, Zanira felt the phantom itch of the tattoo beneath her sleeve. The air was thick with the scent of expensive santal and impending violence. The stage was set, the monsters were in the room, and for the first time in a decade, the ghost felt the world beginning to see her. The silence of the library was a different kind of heavy than the suffocating tension of the main hall. Here, the air was thick with the scent of old paper, leather-bound secrets, and the cloying, fermented heat of Darian Wexler Knox's breath. Zanira moved toward the mahogany side table, her fingers steady as she reached for a crystal decanter of 20-year-old scotch. She was a shadow among the shelves, a ghost performing a service, but Darian's eyes were no longer on the council's business. They were on her. "You're very quiet, aren't you?" His voice was a low, oily rasp that made the fine hairs on Zanira's neck stand up. He didn't wait for an answer. He moved with a clumsy, drunken speed, blocking her path to the door. The door clicked shut, not locked, but the intent was the same. The pervert's price was a known tax among the girls of the staffing agencies, a toll of dignity paid to men who thought their bank accounts granted them ownership of human souls. Zanira kept her head bowed, her voice a soft, practiced whisper. "I am only here to serve the drinks, sir. Personal space." He smelled of sweat and arrogance. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, intending to brush a stray lock of hair, or perhaps to see if she would flinch. "You look like you're hiding something behind that plain little face. Or maybe you just need to be taught how to look a man in the eye." As he lunged to grab her chin, Zanira's instincts, honed by a decade of hiding, flared. She didn't strike, that would be a death sentence. But she pivoted with a grace that was far too fluid for a simple maid. The sudden movement caught Darian off guard. His hand struck the tray she held with a sharp clink. The crystal decanter wobbled, tipped, and then shattered against his hand-tailored silk suit. The amber liquid soaked into his expensive fabric like a spreading wound. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Then the roar came. "You stupid, clumsy bitch." Darian's face contorted into a mask of purple rage. He didn't care about the suit. He cared about the defiance he sensed in her silence. He grabbed her by the arm, his fingers digging into her skin with bruising force. He dragged her out toward the mezzanine, where the council sat like judges in a high-tech purgatory. "Look at this," he shouted, his voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling. He threw her toward the center of the room, forcing her to her knees in front of Kong Jisoo Raymir. "This filth just ruined a $50,000 suit. I want her disciplined. Now." Zanira hit the marble, her hands catching her weight. She remained perfectly still, her head bowed, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was the picture of a broken servant, but beneath her sleeve, the skin was burning. The friction of the fall had pulled her cuff back, exposing the sharp, geometric lines of the Solen crest. The silence that followed Darian's outburst was not the absence of sound, but a vacuum of survival. Zanira remained on her knees, her palms pressed against the cold marble, her breath coming in shallow, rhythmic intervals. She did not look up. She did not need to see the faces of the council to feel the weight of their judgment. Darian stood over her, his chest heaving, his face twisted in a sneer of triumph. "Well?" he demanded, looking toward the center of the room. "Is this how the latte penthouse treats its guests? With incompetence and filth?" Kong Jisoo Raymir did not move. He sat with his hands resting on the arms of his chair, his expression as unreadable as a frozen lake. He looked down at the girl at his feet, not with anger, but with the clinical detachment of a man deciding whether to crush an insect. But as his gaze traveled from her bowed head to the hands bracing her on the floor, his pupils dilated. The friction of the fall had pushed Zanira's white cuff back nearly 3 inches. There, stark against her skin, was the mark. It wasn't a sprawling piece of gang ink or a decorative flourish. It was a small, jagged geometric crest in a shade of red so deep it looked like dried blood. The Ice King didn't just stop, he ceased to breathe. Beside him, the seated elder leaned forward, his sharp, hawkish eyes narrowing as he followed Kang's gaze. The elder's hand, which had been raised to signal the security detail to remove her, froze mid-air. His fingers spread instinctively, a gesture of warding off a ghost. A flicker of genuine, primal unease crossed his heavy brow. "Darian." Kang's voice was a low, vibrating hum that cut through the room like a piano wire. It wasn't a command. It was a warning. "She's a nobody, Kong. A clumsy servant." Darian stepped forward, raising a hand as if to strike her again. "Touch her," Kong said, his voice dropping an octave, "and I will have your hand mounted on my wall before the ice in my glass melts." The room went tomb quiet. The background men, the militaristic wall of dark suits, shifted as one, their hands moving toward their holsters, not at Zanira, but at the sudden shift in the air. Darian froze, his arms still raised, his mouth hanging open in confusion. Kong rose slowly, his movements predatory and precise. He stepped toward Zanira, ignoring the spilled scotch and the shattered crystal. He reached down, his gloved fingers hovering just inches from her wrist. He didn't touch her, he didn't dare. "The Solen crest?" the seated elder whispered, his voice cracking with age and shock. "The lineage of the shadow. They told us they were all dead. They told us the night of ash left no one." Zanira finally tilted her head back, her hazel eyes meeting Kang's for the first time. The submissive mask didn't slip, it dissolved. "The fire was hot," she said, her voice steady and devoid of fear. "But the shadows were deeper." Kong Jisu Raymir, the man who feared nothing in soul, felt a cold sweat break across his neck. He realized in that moment that he wasn't looking at a maid. He was looking at the only person in the world who knew where his own sins were buried. The tension in the room was a physical weight, a wire pulled so tight it was destined to snap. Darian stood paralyzed by Kang's threat, his hands still hovering in the air like a dead weight. But the explosion didn't come from Kong. Came from the sky. The floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass of the penthouse didn't just break. It atomized. A concussive blast rocked the foundation of the building, followed immediately by the rhythmic thrum-thrum-thrum of a blacked-out helicopter hovering just feet from the balcony. "Down!" Kong roared, reaching for the side of his chair, but the first volley of suppressed gunfire was already shredding the upholstery. The background men reacted with militaristic precision, but they were outpositioned. Smoke grenades hissed across the marble, blooming into thick, gray clouds that swallowed the light. Through the haze, black-clad figures rappelled from the ceiling, their thermal goggles glowing like the eyes of deep-sea predators. In the chaos, Zanira didn't scream. She didn't cower. The shy maid vanished, replaced by a ghost that moved through the smoke with the fluidity of a shadow. Kong was pinned behind a fallen mahogany table, his weapon jammed by a piece of flying debris. An assassin landed 5 feet from him, leveling a submachine gun at the Ice King's chest. The man's finger tightened on the trigger, and then his head snapped back. Zanira had moved. She didn't use a gun. She used the silver serving tray she had been carrying moments before. With a flick of her wrist, she sent the heavy, sharpened disc whistling through the smoke. It struck the assassin's throat with a sickening thud, dropping him instantly. Before his body hit the floor, Zanira was already over him. She snatched the fallen weapon, rolled behind a marble pillar, and came up firing. She didn't fire in panicked bursts. She fired in double taps, each one finding the gap in the attacker's armor. Her movements were a terrifying dance of specialized training, lethal, efficient, and cold. "Kong, to the service elevator," she commanded. Her voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a blade. Kong Jisu Raymir watched in stunned silence as the woman he had just been judging for a spilled drink neutralized a second attacker with a brutal, close-quarters strike to the temple. She moved with the predatory grace of a lineage that had brokered the deaths of kings. As a third assassin rounded the pillar, Zanira grabbed a heavy crystal decanter, the very one Darian had mocked, and smashed it against the attacker's mask, the shards of glass acting like shrapnel. She shoved the dazed man into the line of fire of his own team, creating a 2-second window of escape. "Now!" she barked, grabbing Kang's arm with a grip of iron. The glass fortress had fallen, but as they sprinted toward the hidden exit, Kong realized the real danger wasn't the men with guns. It was the woman currently leading him to safety. The maid was dead. The Solen had returned. The armored SUV tore through the rain-slicked neon streets of Gangnam, a silent predator cutting through the midnight fog. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and spent gunpowder. Kong Jisu Raymir sat in the shadows of the rear seat, his breath hitching as he watched the woman beside him. Zanira wasn't shaking. She was methodically ejecting the magazine from the stolen submachine gun, checking the remaining rounds with a clinical, detached focus. "The latte penthouse is compromised," Kong said, his voice a low rasp. My inner circle has a leak. We're going to the fortress. The fortress was a brutalist concrete sanctuary hidden beneath a traditional Hanok estate on the outskirts of the city, a golden cage designed to withstand a siege. As the heavy steel gates ground shut behind them, the transition was jarring. They moved from the high-tech chaos of the breach to a subterranean world of soft amber lights and silk-paneled walls. Kong turned to her the moment the reinforced door clicked shut. He didn't offer her a seat. He didn't offer her water. He simply grabbed her wrist, pulling back the torn lace of her maid's uniform to stare at the crimson geometric mark. The Solen lineage didn't just broker information, Kong whispered, his eyes searching hers for a flicker of the shy girl he had seen earlier. He found nothing but a cold, obsidian depth. They held the Lambra, the master encryption keys to every shadow bank in the Eastern Hemisphere. My father spent 30 years looking for those codes. He died believing they burned in the night of ash. Zanira pulled her arm back, her movements sharp and regal. Your father was looking for a ledger. My family was the ledger. She stepped into the center of the room, the opulence of the safe house reflecting in her eyes. The men who attacked your penthouse weren't looking for you, Kong. They were looking for the girl who could unlock the vault that holds your empire's debt. If they find me, your wealth disappears. Your men will turn on you. You'll be a king with no kingdom by sunrise. Kong felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He realized then that his survival wasn't dependent on his guards or his guns. It was dependent on the nothing who had spent 3 years cleaning his floors. You stayed hidden for a decade, Kong noted, his voice tight. Why save me? Why reveal yourself now? Zanira looked at the silk-covered walls, her new cage. Because the men who breached your glass tonight are the same ones who lit the fire 10 years ago. I'm tired of being air, Kong. I want to be the storm. In the dim light of the fortress, the Ice King of Seoul realized he hadn't just rescued a maid. He had invited a goddess of vengeance into his home, and she held the keys to his life in her blood-stained hands. The safe house was a cathedral of shadows, the only sound the low hum of the air filtration system. Zanira stood by a wall of monitors, her reflection caught in the dark glass. A girl in a ruined maid's uniform who looked like she belonged in a palace of bones. Kong watched her from the leather armchair, his silhouetted form as rigid as a statue. The night of ash wasn't a fire, Kong. It was a deletion. Zanira began, her voice low and resonant, echoing against the concrete walls. My father didn't just broker information. He built the architecture of the shadow world. Every bribe, every offshore account, every hidden execution, it was all mapped in a digital labyrinth. They called it the Lambra, and the only way to navigate it was through a biometric sequence passed down through my blood. She stepped closer to the amber light of a desk lamp, the glow catching the jagged edges of the crimson tattoo on her wrist. 10 years ago, the global syndicate realized they didn't want to pay for our services anymore. They wanted the keys. They came to our estate in the Caribbean under the guise of a summit. My mother smelled the kerosene before the first match was struck. A ghost of a shudder passed through her, but her eyes remained ice-cold. They locked the doors. They wanted to burn the Solen name out of history so they could claim the Lambra as their own. I watched from the ventilation shafts as my father stood in the center of the library, his skin blistering, typing the final command into the mainframe. He didn't save the data. He tethered it to me. Kong leaned forward, his hands clasped tight. Tethered? How? The tattoo isn't just ink, Zanira whispered, tracing the geometric lines. It's a subcutaneous storage drive, a piece of biological engineering that holds the master decryption keys. If my heart stops, the drive wipes itself. If I am captured and the wrong sequence is entered, the global financial markets of the underworld collapse. I am the only reason the syndicate hasn't already swallowed Seoul. I am the living insurance policy for every boss who ever did business with my father, including yours. The weight of her words settled in the room like a physical pressure. Kong realized then that the girl he had seen scrubbing floors was the most dangerous asset on the planet. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a walking nuclear option. "They killed my family for the keys," she said, her gaze pinning Kong to his seat. "And now, your own counsel is helping them finish the job. You think you're protecting me in this fortress? Kong? You're not. You're holding the only person who can tell you which of your brothers is holding the match." The silence of the fortress was broken by the rhythmic clacking of keys as Zanira bypassed the firewalls of Kang's private server. Her fingers moved with a terrifying, ancestral speed, her face illuminated by the cold blue light of the monitors. Kong stood behind her, his breath held, watching his own empire be stripped down to its skeleton. "The breach at the penthouse wasn't a failure of security," Zanira whispered, her eyes tracking lines of encrypted code that looked like gibberish to anyone else. "It was an invitation. Someone deactivated the thermal sensors on the north balcony 3 minutes before the first glass shattered. They didn't just let the assassins in, they gave them the floor plans." She tapped a final command, and the screen flickered, revealing a hidden offshore account labeled Lombarref. A list of digital handshakes appeared, linking a high-level encrypted wallet to a name that made the color drain from Kang's face. "Vinny the Butcher Choi," Kong rasped, his hand tightening on the back of Zanira's chair until the leather groaned. "He's been my father's right hand for 20 years. He's the one who suggested the council meeting tonight. He isn't just your right hand, Kong. He's the syndicate's puppet," Zanira said, her voice dropping to a lethal chill. She pointed to a signature at the bottom of a decrypted file, a stylized mark that mirrored the jagged lines of her own tattoo, but inverted. "This is the mark of the Vexler Group, the same men who funded the Night of Ash. Vinny didn't just betray you for money. He's been their mole since the day my family's estate burned. He was the one who confirmed the Solen lineage was extinct. He's been lying to you for a decade to protect his own skin." The realization hit Kong like a physical blow. The man he called uncle, the man who had held his mother's hand at his father's funeral, was the architect of his current ruin. Vinny had been waiting for the Lombra to resurface, and the moment Zanira's tattoo was exposed in that penthouse, the butcher had signaled his true masters. "He thinks I'm a cornered animal," Kong said, his eyes turning to flint. "He thinks with the penthouse destroyed and the council in doubt, I have nowhere to turn." Zanira stood up, turning to face him. The ruined maid's uniform was gone, replaced by a black tactical sweater she had found in the armory. She looked less like a servant and more like a high priestess of war. "Let him think that," she said, a dark smile playing on her lips. "Vinny thinks he's hunting a ghost. He doesn't realize that the ghost has been watching him through the floorboards for 3 years. He's not the hunter, Kong. He's the bait." The underground chamber of the Schiller estate was a cathedral of cold stone and hidden microphones, a place where the air always tasted of old damp and fresh betrayal. The inner council sat around a table of black obsidian, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of traditional floor lanterns. At the head of the table sat Vinny, the Butcher Choi, his expression one of feigned mourning as he mourned the tragic loss of Kang's penthouse. Standing just 3 paces behind Kong Jisoo Raymir was a figure the council barely acknowledged. Zanira had traded her maid's apron for a sharp, charcoal gray suit, her hair slicked back into a lethal, high ponytail. She wore a pair of horn-rimmed glasses and carried a sleek tablet, looking every bit the part of a high-level digital analyst, a specialist brought in to assess the security breach. She was invisible in a new way, shielded by the arrogance of men who saw her as a tool rather than a threat. "The syndicate is demanding a tribute, Kong," Vinny said, his voice thick with a fatherly concern that made Zanira's skin crawl. "They say the Solen girl was in your care and you lost her. They want the encryption keys or they want your head." Kong didn't blink. He leaned back, his fingers steepled. "My specialist has spent the last 4 hours tracing the digital footprint of the attackers. She found something unexpected." Zanira stepped forward on cue, her movements precise and devoid of the maid's glide. She didn't look at Vinny. She looked at the tablet. "The breach was initiated from an internal MAC address," she said, her voice a cool, professional monotone that cut through the room's tension. A ghost signal was routed through a server in the Caribbean, the same server used during the Night of Ash 10 years ago. The room went tomb quiet. Vinny's hand, reaching for a porcelain teacup, twitched almost imperceptibly. Caribbean? That's ancient history, girl. Focus on the present. I am, Zanira replied, finally looking up. Her eyes met Vinny's, and for a split second, she let the ghost show through the lenses of her glasses. I've traced the payout for the hit. 5 million in untraceable cryptocurrency, moved from a Vexler Group account into a private wallet. The wallet's owner is in this room. The shadow dinner had officially begun. The council members shifted, their hands moving beneath the table toward concealed holsters. Vinny's mask of concern began to crack, revealing the predator beneath. He didn't realize that the specialist wasn't just reading data. She was reading his death warrant. Zanira felt the weight of the Lombra keys beneath her skin, a digital pulse that felt like a heartbeat. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the girl who once scrubbed their floors was now the only one holding the leash. The silence that followed Zanira's revelation was the sound of an empire cracking. Vinny, the butcher Choi, didn't reach for his tea this time. He reached for the suppressed pistol tucked into his waistband. But before his fingers could even graze the cold steel, the room erupted. Kong was faster. He didn't fire a weapon. He simply nodded. The background men, who had stood like statues throughout the dinner, pivoted with terrifying synchronization. Their loyalty hadn't been bought by the syndicate. It had been reinforced by the truth Zanira had laid bare on their tactical HUDs moments before entering. 3 red laser dots appeared on Vinny's chest, steady and lethal. The butcher's reign ends tonight, Kong said, his voice as sharp as a guillotine. Vinny looked around the table, searching for an ally, but he found only the cold, judgmental stares of the council he had tried to sell. You're taking the word of a servant? He spat, his face purple with desperation. A girl who polishes your floors? I'm taking the word of a Solen, Kong replied, rising from his seat. The only person in this room who hasn't lied to me. As the security detail dragged a screaming Vinny into the shadows of the corridor, a journey from which no mole ever returned, the remaining council members looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. The power vacuum was palpable, a swirling vortex of uncertainty. Kong didn't reclaim the seat. Instead, he stepped aside and gestured toward the obsidian throne. For 10 years, you were a ghost because you had to be, he murmured, his eyes meeting Zanira's. Now, be a ghost because they need to fear what they cannot see. Zanira didn't hesitate. She walked to the head of the table, her charcoal suit sharp, her posture commanding the room. As she sat, she placed her tablet on the table, the screen glowing with the master keys of the Lombra. The crimson tattoo on her wrist was fully visible now, no longer a secret to be hidden, but a crown to be worn. Vinny was right about one thing, Zanira said, her voice echoing with a cold, regal authority that made the veteran captains lean in. I know every floorboard in this city. I know which of your mistresses has a gambling debt, and I know which of your sons is skimming from the docks. I have been heir for a long time, and heir is everywhere. The council didn't just stay silent. They bowed. The transition was complete. The shy maid who had arrived in Seoul with nothing but a blood-stained memory was gone. In her place sat the shadow queen of the underworld, a woman who had turned her invisibility into the ultimate weapon. Beside her, the Ice King looked on with a grim, satisfied smile. The war was far from over, but for the first time in a decade, the Solen lineage wasn't running. They were ruling.